today. Today our project is a very quick and easy sew. We're going to do a quilt as you go method on dry mats that I've purchased from the Dollar Tree using strips of fabric. I've used strips that I've cut from fat quarters, but you can use strips out of your scrap stash. You can sew strips or pieces together to make strips. Very quick and easy sew. Wonderful gift project. You can use them as placemats, as dry mats, all kinds of things. So here's the finished product of what we're going to do today. Very beautiful, vibrant colors. So let's get started. All right, so for today's tutorial, you're going to need a dish dry mat. This is one I purchased at the Dollar Tree. Any of them will work. This is just the cheapest that I found, and for $1.25 at the Dollar Tree, you can't beat the price. Thread, you can either do coordinating thread or contrasting thread. That's your choice, but you need thread. I'm just using regular Gutermann's thread. You'll need clips for securing pieces together. Some sort of erasable or removable ink, whether it be a washout, air erase, chalk. You don't want something that's going to be permanent. You'll need a ruler for marking, just a couple of places on the binding. A rotary cutter if you have one, if not, scissors will work. And of course scissors. And then you'll need just different strips. Today, for the tutorial I'm doing, I have taken fat quarters and I have cut them into 2-inch strips. So they're 2 inches by 21 inches, which is the width of the fat quarter. You can use jelly roll strips. You can use whatever size you want. Some of the examples I showed in the introduction were 2.5 inch wide. You can do larger, smaller, whatever you prefer. But today I'm going to do the 2-inch wide strips. It's also a great scrap buster if you want to sew some pieces together and then cut them into strips. You can do that too. Makes a really cute scrappy look, and it's a great way to use up those scraps. So let's get started. So this is the dry mat that I purchased from the Dollar Tree. You can get them everywhere, but for $1.25, you know, I typically take the tags off. You can cut them off, you can rip them off, but we can do that after. That's fine. I used the back with the tag on it as the back actually. So you'll see I've marked, they're 12 inches wide. So you want to mark it, center at 6, and they're 17 inches across typically. You gotta watch the edges, they're not always square. It's a good thing to kind of measure, although it isn't a perfect, I mean, it's a quilted handmade type of thing. So if it's not perfect, it's just kind of part of the way it is. But 17, half of that is 6.5. Get the right side there. I'm sorry, half of it's 8.5. And you can see my little dot there. So that's where I'm gonna say my center is. So that's where I'm gonna start. For this design, I've decided to do 2-inch strips. I have 13 different colors. I use fat quarters. For the fat quarters in a 2-inch strip, you can get 9 strips out of it if you go the lengthwise. So it'll be 21 inches across and 2 inches wide. I use these more than once, so the way that we use it, I just kind of keep the extra and set it aside. But let me show you what I do. So I did decide that my first piece is going to be a 4-inch piece. So I'm just going to kind of fold it to find the center, and then I'm just going to kind of put that corner there and lay it down and call it good. So I'm going to say this is the center. Keep in mind, these little squares are not always straight, so don't go totally off of those. It will definitely make it wonky. So my first one's 4 inches. I'm going to take my second piece, which is this bubble, and I'm going to take the right side and I'm going to lay it down on top of that piece. I'm going to leave a tiny bit extra on the end just so I have a little bit of move room, I guess, flex room. But I'm going to sew it all the way, and I can kind of see through where my 4 inches. So I'm going to sew it all the way down here at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I don't need to back tack because you're going to go over them. So you're just going to go 1/4 inch seam allowance till I get to the end of the one underneath. You can see through and stop. Okay, so I'm using a 1/4 inch foot. So I'm just going to put that underneath, and I'm just going to sew that 1/4 inch all the way down till I get to the end of that 4-inch piece that's underneath. Just keeping it straight with that edge of the fabric for my 1/4 inch. When I get to that 1/4 inch, I'm just going to stop. Alright, whoops, threads. So I have sewed my 1/4 inch seam, as you can see right down here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this extra piece and I'm going to fold it backwards over itself just to kind of give me an edge. And I'm just going to take my scissors and slide it into there and cut it off. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight. You do want to see how there's overlap. It doesn't matter how much, as long as there's a little. And then I'm going to take the piece I just sewed on, and I'm going to press it back. I'm just going to kind of finger press it. Alright, so that's my first piece. So now I'm going to take my second strip, which is this one, and I'm going to go to the end. I'm going to match the edge of this first one. I'm not matching this, okay? That's going to stick out. So, and it's going to stick out a little bit here, but I'm just going to lay it on top of this one and lay it flat. And then I'm going to sew that 1/4 inch seam allowance here down this side. And like I said, you don't have to back tack because you're sewing over each piece. So once again, I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is the first piece that I put down, and I'm going to match the edge of that. That's my straight piece. The rest of it is just the extra so that I know I have enough, and when I get done sewing, it's going to cover up the next piece. Okay, so 1/4 inch seam. These little dry mats are super easy to sew through. I know I don't need to back tack, that's habit, sorry. Okay, so now I'm going to take it back and put the next piece on. Okay, so now we're back from the machine, and you can see, let me cut some threads here. You can see there's my 1/4 inch seam. It's lined up with that piece underneath, and I'm going to once again take this long loop and I'm going to fold it back over itself, making sure my edges are even, or pretty even, making sure there's a little bit extra here, and I'm just going to take my scissors and I'm just going to cut it off. Then I'm going to take this piece and finger press it over. And there we go. Now we just keep going around and around. So the next piece I have, I'm going to line up once again with the edge of this, with this long edge. And I'm going to lay it down, making sure it covers all the way past this piece. Lay it down straight and even with the first piece that I put down, and I'm going to go ahead and sew a 1/4 inch seam. I'm not going to show that because I think you guys at this point have the understanding of the 1/4 inch seam. So I will be right back. Okay, so back from the machine. I've got it stitched down. I'm going to once again finger press this, or sorry, we're going to cut it first. Fold this back over itself. So we have a little bit of extra at the end, and then we're just going to take and cut that off and pull this back and finger press it down. And then I'm going to take my next strip and do the same thing. I'm going to take, now this is the edge that I'm going to follow right here. I'm always going to follow the long edge, not these little ends. So I'm going to lay this down, line it up with this, overlap it a little bit, and once again it's a 1/4 inch seam allowance down that side. Okay, and we're back. Once again, 1/4 inch. I'm going to fold my fabric back, Make sure there's some overlap here. Make a crease. Slide those scissors in. Cut that off. And go to the next piece, or fold it back. And then you're going to go to the next piece. And let's see. This is my next color. So I'm going to, once again, I want to go a little bit past this. This is the edge I'm lining it up with. This main edge in the middle. So let's see, let's go to the cut edge. And I'm going to line that up. Line it up right here along this. You can see how that's lined up right there. And once again, 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm just going to keep doing this around and around and around until I have all these pieces attached, following those same steps of 1/4 inch seam allowance. Fold it back on itself, cut it a little bit longer, fold it over, finger press it down, add the next piece. Okay, so I have gone around and around and around and added pieces all the way around until my whole mat is full. Now on these sides, instead of going around, I had a little extra on the side, so I just added strips and kept moving out. You can see on the back side, you can see the design from where I've sewn it, and I have overlap all the way around. After I've got all these pieces on, I went ahead and I took it to the machine, and around the edge of the mat underneath, you can kind of see, I just basted this down. So I just sewed all the way around the edge of the mat to baste all of my fabric down. The next step we're going to do is we're going to trim it. And all we're going to do is we're going to turn it over to have the wrong side up, or the mat side up, and take our ruler, and as best as we can, it doesn't have to be perfect. Sorry, I had to get my cutter. But you know, you don't want to cut the mat or too much of the mat. A little bit of it's fine if it's really wonky. But I'm just going to take my rotary cutter and I'm just going to cut the edges. So those are off. See, I did get the mat a little bit, but that is totally fine because we're gonna bind it with bias. Actually, it's not really bias, it's just binding. But you can see how clean that is and how straight that is. So I'm just going to do that all the way around. I'm just going to take the ruler. This one's a little short, so I'll have to kind of do it in 2 passes, but that's okay. Just take the ruler, line it up with the edge of the mat, and you're going to cut all the excess fabric off. And then I'm going to just move it down and finish that side out. Looks like I could have got a little bit more off, so we'll just add a little more there. All the way off. And I'm just going to continue and do that with the other 2 sides. Okay, so you can see my mat, sorry, cord. My mat is all trimmed. It may not be 100% straight, as far as my design might be a little kiltered. That's because the mats are not perfect. So it isn't necessarily going to be perfect. You can take your time and measure. You can measure each strip if you want and go through and make sure that they're all perfectly even. It isn't that important to me for this project. Maybe if I was doing it as a gift for somebody that I really wanted it perfect, or that kind of thing, then I would. But for this, it's a quilted project. I kind of like that it's a little bit wonky because it's handmade. But there are ways, like I said, if you want it perfectly straight, you can measure each time to make sure your lines are straight. Totally okay to do that. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to actually bind this, and we're going to bind this the same way that you would bind a quilt. So we need to make the binding, and then we need to attach the binding. So next step, we're going to be making that binding. Okay, so for the binding, I have actually cut a bunch of, they're 2.5 inch wide strips, so let me lay it down. This from here to here is 2.5 inches, and then the length is the width of the fabric I'm using. So as long a fabric, if you have a full yard, you can go across the full yard. So it would be 2.5 by around 40 inches long. It takes, if I remember right, it takes about 60 inches to do around one placemat. So we need to attach these strips together. The best way to do that is on an angle, and it can be tricky, but you can do it. So you're going to take one piece with the bulk of it to the right, or I'm sorry, to the left, pointing that way, and you're going to deal with the end of it. I'm going to take another strip, and I'm going to turn it right side down, and I'm going to lay it on top of this corner. I'm going to kind of overlap it just a little bit. You can kind of see right here where these two meet and intersect. I'm going to take my ruler and some sort of marking tool. It can be air erase, it can be a friction pen, just something, but you don't want it to be noticeable, so something that will erase or disappear. But I'm going to line my ruler up on an angle, so it's a 45-degree angle, top of the ruler on the left side and the bottom of the ruler on the right side. I'm going to line up these little intersection points in my ruler, and I'm going to take my marker and I'm just going to very lightly make a line. Now, if you're good with sewing, you don't need to make the line. You can just aim from this point to this point when you're sewing. Most people, and I'm pretty good at keeping a straight stitch, but I like to have my binding fairly straight, so I tend to do it this way. And then I take clips and I just clip these two edges together. I like using these hair clips that I got from Walmart because they're long and they hold it, but I can still sew it with them out of the way. So you can kind of see, there's my line. It meets that intersection and that intersection. So I'm going to take this to the machine and I'm going to sew right on top of that line, from that corner to that corner. So once again, there's our binding, there's the corner we made, and I'm just going to trim this about 1/4 inch seam, and then I'm just going to kind of pull it open and I'm just going to finger press it. I'm just going to kind of put my finger in there and press it down. So that's how you attach the strips of binding together. However many placemats you're making, or dry mats, or whatever you're going to use these for, is you know how long you need it. If you just measure the circumference around, so measure both the sides in order to know how much you need. Measure each side and each end and add it all together. So two 12-inch sides is 24, and two 17-inch sides is 30, what is that? 34. So you're looking at around 58, 60 inches. You want to give yourself about an extra 5 inches. So 65 inches would get you one placemat. And that's with a little extra, but you always, when you bind, you always want to do extra. So we are going to prepare our binding now. Now that we have our strip, I'm going to take this to the iron and I'm going to fold it in half, long sides together. And I'm going to press the whole length of it down that way so that it's all right sides together and the raw edges match. So I have a fold on one end, matching raw edges on the other, and I will be right back. Okay, so I have folded and ironed my binding. So I'm going to take my placemat, and I like to start on the long edge. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put, let me cut that selvage off. It doesn't matter, I'm not going to use it, but I'd rather, I mean, it's not going to be there, but I'd rather just not deal with it. So I'm going to leave about a 5-inch tail that I'm not going to sew down. It'll be extra. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to go around my whole placemat, and I'm just going to clip it down. Now, you could clip it down. Typically, I just take it and sew, but for demonstration purposes, we'll just clip it down. We're putting raw edges, the folded edges over here. The raw edges are even with the raw edges of the mat. Now, we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around it, but with binding to have beautiful binding. When you get down to this corner and you're about a 1/4 inch square, so you can even take a ruler and mark a 1/4 inch there if you want, if that's easier for you. My foot has a mark on it, so I know where that is on my foot, but you can do this. Take a little, once again, a pen that's air erase or will go away, wash out. You don't want something permanent, don't use a Sharpie. So there's my line. So I'm going to sew this clear down to that line, and then I'm going to sew it all the way off the corner. So all the way down till I get my needle in that dot, and then I'm just going to sew zip, clear to the point, just off of the whole placemat to where the needle is no longer in there. So when I do that, this is going to be attached like that, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to make a 45-degree angle here, and the edge of my binding is going to be even. Let me center this a little bit more so you can see it. The edge of my binding is going to be even with the edge of the placemat. Okay, so you can kind of see. Now your needle's not in your fabric at all, and then you're going to fold this down to make a corner. You're still going to keep these edges even, and this makes a really, it's just straight. There's a fold here and it's straight down, and then you're going to just continue to start here at a 1/4 inch seam and just sew all the way down, and do the same thing on the other end. Stop at 1/4 inch and go zip and zip right off the corner. So you're going to twist with the needle still in the fabric. You're going to turn the placemat and zip right off of that corner, and you're going to do that all the way around till you want to leave about 5 inches open. So I'm probably going to only work till about here. That leaves a little bit more than 5 inches, because then we're going to attach that binding together, and so you need to have a little extra space for that for it to look good. So we're going to go to the machine, and I'm going to go ahead and do that and sew all the way around. I'm not going to clip it all down, because at each corner you're going to do that. Okay, so at the machine I've got a big end here left that I'm not going to sew, and I'm going to start about here, and I'm just going to do my 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down till I get to that corner dot, or until I get to a 1/4 inch away from both sides. And I am using a 2.5 millimeter stitch length, in case that's, you know, probably use whatever is standard for standard sewing on your machine, but that's what I use on this. Alright, so I'm watching my foot, and right there is my corner. So my needle's in still. I'm just going to pivot my placemat. I can see my corner right here. I don't know if you can see it, but I can. I'm just going to sew straight off and lift up my needle. So you can kind of see, hopefully you can kind of see that it goes, and then it goes straight down. And then I'm going to do that fold. I don't necessarily have to cut my threads, because it's kind of like the chain sewing thing. So I'm going to take this and fold it back at 90 degrees, making sure these edges are straight. And then I'm going to fold this back down, making the raw edges even on the edges all the way down, and making sure that this fold is even with the top of this. So this fold right here is even with the top of my placemat. It's not going farther, it's not down below, it's even. And I'm gonna just take this back to the machine. And I'm just gonna do my 1/4 inch seam allowance straight down to the other end of my mat, making sure that my raw edges are even on this side. Want nice straight lines. This actually is the way that quilters typically quilt, put the bindings on their quilts, and it's a beautiful finish when it's all done. So I'm getting closer to my end. I'm just making sure my sides are still straight. And I'll show you this one more time. You get to a 1/4 inch from this edge. A couple more stitches. And then I'm gonna keep the needle in there, pivot this, and sew straight off of that corner. Okay, and then, sorry, bumped the camera. And then you're gonna fold this back straight up. I don't know if you can see it, to where this edge is even. I've got a really nice 45-degree angle right here. And then I'm gonna take this and fold it back down, making sure that this edge is even and this edge is even. Looks good. So I'm just gonna put this back under the needle and sew at my 1/4 inch seam allowance, and sew the rest of the way down the side, and repeat that for the next corner. Okay, so I'm back from the machine. I have all 4 of my corners done. You can see that they're folded and sewn down. I did it the way that we said. Go off the corner, make a 90-degree angle, fold it back on itself so you can see. If you open it up, there's your 90-degree angle. Okay, all 4 of my corners are done that way. I've left this longer flap, which is, I don't know, about 5-6 inches long. And then I have the rest of my binding that I have not cut. And let me reiterate, I probably said that wrong at the beginning. I would do 70 inches for each of these mats, just so that you know for sure you have enough. You probably won't need that much, but I think for comfort, I would do 70 inches. So when you do binding, our binding, we started with a 2.5 inch wide strip. That's how wide this is right here. So with binding, that rule of thumb is however wide your binding is, you want to overlap your fabric that far. So what I mean by that is, I'm going to take this piece that isn't sewn down, and I'm going to go 2.5 inches. You can see right here is my 2.5 inch mark, and I'm going to cut that off at 2.5 inches. I know it's scary. And then I'm going to lay this on top. This one isn't the one I finished with, and I'm going to lay it on top, and I'm going to cut it off at 2.5 inch overlap. So I'm basically going to cut it off even with this seam. Okay, now this is the hardest part of the whole project, and it's not hard, it just can be tedious. What you need to do is we need to join these 2 ends together. So we're gonna move the one, take the one to the left and just set it aside. We're gonna take the one to the right, we're gonna open it, and we're gonna lay it right side up. Okay? Now we're gonna take the other one, we're gonna open it, and we're gonna lay it right side down on top. Now we're doing the same thing we did earlier. It's just awkward. So we're gonna line up the edges and see where our little overlap is. So I'm just gonna take my clips to kind of clip it out to get it started. Once you kind of get it clipped, it goes a little bit better. Okay, I actually went back and pulled out some of this stitching because it was just too tight. So I'm going to go ahead once again, I'm going to lay this, I'm going to pull it downward and I'm going to lay it open. See, I can get that open before I can get it open because it was just, there was too much stitching there. So I just pulled out a little bit of stitching. Just keep that in mind. If it seems like you're tight and there's just not enough room to work, you can always take out a little bit of the stitching. It's okay. So now I'm going to take my other piece and I am going to flip it right side down and I'm going to line that up. Much easier. It's much easier to do this. So I'll have a little bit of overhang on each side. I'm just going to take my clip and I'm going to clip it at the bottom to kind of hold it for me. And I'm going to do the same on top. Kind of lay it flat. It's working with it. Once you get this though, it'll be great. Okay? Okay, so once you get it, it'll be great. Just keep working with it, flattening it out. If you have to take some clips to kind of clip this together, clip it to itself over here so that you have more room to work, you can do that. Whatever it takes to kind of get this maneuvered around. It isn't hard, it's just a little tedious. So my bottom piece is flat, my top piece is flat on top of it. Some of it will kind of flatten out at the sewing machine too, but I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to draw a line from here to here, keeping my edges overlapped just a little bit, so I can visually see where I need to go. And then I'm going to sew that seam. So clip them down, clip edges down. That looks good. You do have a little bit of flexibility with this. If it isn't quite perfect, it'll be okay. So I'm going to take my ruler at those places where they intersect. I'm going to lay it down. And I'll draw a line. And then I'm going to take it to the machine and I'm going to sew down that line. I will be right back. Okay, so you can see where my line was and it's sewn across there. Take the clip out. Now if you just pull it, take the other clip off the top. See how nicely that lays? It lays perfectly flat. That is a perfect fit for the amount of binding. It doesn't have gaps, it's not pulled tight, it's perfect fit. So just kind of keep that little secret in mind, that however wide your binding is how much overlap you want on your two pieces of binding when you're finishing them. So as I did before, this little triangle here, I'm just going to trim it to 1/4 inch about. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then I'm going to just finger press it. So just take my finger and kind of flatten it out. By doing it on the angle like that, because you could just sew end together, but this reduces bulk and it just makes for a nicer finished look. Either way really isn't wrong, but this is the way I like it. So, okay. So now I'm just going to take it to the machine and I'm going to go ahead and stitch those down, starting at where I finished on one end and going all the way across to where I started at the other end, and I'm going to back tack, and I'm going to still use my 1/4 inch seam for that stitching. So all of the binding is sewn down, all the raw edges meet, we have a pretty fold on the inside, and we're going to finish this by just taking the binding and we're just going to fold it backwards. If you look on this side, it's just folded over, and we're just going to clip it. So we're going to clip all the way around. However many clips you want to use is fine. You can use a few, you can use a lot. It's your choice and what you're comfortable with. And see, I flipped that corner around, and look at that, a beautiful mitered corner. So we're going to keep clipping on the front, on the back, whatever's easiest. When we get to the back, when we get to this corner, we're just going to fold the next side over the top. And see how they meet? Well, they meet when you see how beautiful that is. And we're just put a clip in it to hold it in place and keep going. So we're just going to keep bringing that around the back. It's easier for me if I turn it over and work from the back, and then I just kind of check out the front before I'm done to make sure it looks somewhat even. So just keep going around, clipping all your binding down, and I'll meet you back here for the next step. Okay, so I have all of my binding clipped down all the way around, and you can see on the back the corners how pretty they are. They just meet beautifully. So I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm just going to stitch in the ditch. And what that means is I'm just going to put my needle in there, in this crack, or right in between where these two colors meet, and I'm just going to stitch all the way around. You can do a decorative stitch all the way around it on there if you want. That would be beautiful. You can do a zigzag if that's something that you would like to do. That helps, you know, make it look. You can use an accent color of thread, or you can use a color that blends, but that gives it a little bit more decorative if you use a zigzag. But I'm just going to stitch in the ditch. I am using white thread on the top, and I'm going to use lavender on the bottom, so I'm going to match. You will see, because this is going to stitch, you're going to see it on this side. So whatever color you use, you can use a contrasting color, you can use a color that blends, whatever your preference is, but just know the bobbin thread you will see. When I did my stitching on the back, I did use a color that matched. So you can't, you know, you can see the quilting as far as you can see the shadowing, but you don't really see all the stitches because I used that color. You could use an alternating color there too if you want to make it look, give it a little bit of a design. That's just not what I wanted to do this time. So once again, I'm going to take it to the machine. I'm going to stitch all the way around in the ditch, and I will meet you back here. Just about done. Okay, so now we're all done. That is actually it. This placemat or dry mat or whatever you choose to use it for is complete. Wasn't that a fun project? I just love how quick and easy it is to bring it all together. It just is so fast. Making these, using them as placemats, you can make a set of placemats for somebody easily in a day. You can use scraps you have laying around. You can create them with specific fabrics that you buy and strip. You can do so many things with them. Some of the other designs that I've done with it is I did an embroidery design on my embroidery machine, and then I just kind of framed it. So that's one. I used leftover jelly roll strips with this one, and I did just started at one corner and went to the other corner, used different widths of strips. So there's an idea. I also kind of fussy cutted. This is a Christmas design. I fussy cutted a panel in the center, and then I just made contrasting fabrics, and instead of going around and around, I just did top and bottom, and then sides, and then top and bottom and sides. made it quick and easy. And then this is just another one with the same kind of style that we did today with just leftover jelly roll strips. So it is really quick and easy, very versatile. I hope you enjoyed this. If you enjoyed this video, if you could please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. I appreciate the support. If you have any comments, questions, anything you'd like me to show you, or any specific projects you'd like to see, I would love to hear your feedback. Any comments, I will answer everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share with you some of the passions I have and the projects that I've been working on. I hope you have a wonderful and blessed day. Thank you.